Israel is once again brutalizing the Palestinians in this escalating campaign of military aggression. Now, if you're wondering how this all got started, it was over Israel once again pushing Palestinians off of their own land in territory that is internationally recognized as illegally annexed by Israel. And this is not something that Palestine itself is merely accusing Israel of. This is something that Israel itself admits. This is the former Prime Minister of Israel, Olmert, admitting on RT that they are taking these homes and this land out from under the Palestinians, and that this is a contributing factor driving this chaos.
Forced evictions, how can you argue that? That is inflaming the tension, surely.
Look, they certainly are not improving the chances for some peaceful and friendly discussion and process of negotiations. There is no question about it.
Now, I can't do a better job talking about this than Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore did in this conversation. And I'm going to link to this conversation in the video description below, as well as in a pinned comment at the top of the comment section. What I want to do is kind of zoom out a little bit and give a clearer picture of this larger geopolitical game. Israel, from the very beginning, was part of a wider Anglo-American campaign of divide and conquer across the Middle East. It was a sort of forward operating base for Western interests, and it still most certainly is. And the Israeli government running Israel right now, they do things on purpose to provoke people emotionally, to enrage people. They deliberately attack non-military targets to create immense animosity towards Israel, which, when you think about it, is not in the best interests of even the Israelis themselves. But that's because Israel is not truly a sovereign nation. It is one of many client regimes around the globe that the Anglo-American empire maintains to divide and conquer the planet, essentially. And I remember this playing out tragically at the beginning of the Arab Spring. This hatred toward Israel that Israel itself deliberately provokes was used to confuse everything surrounding the Arab Spring. This was a US-engineered, region-wide political destabilization campaign, and yet we saw the Western media spreading these rumors that Israel wanted to save the regime of Hosni Mubarak or Muammar Gaddafi or preferred Bashar al-Assad over the rebels. And people saw this, and because they hate Israel so much, they switched off their critical thinking, they were robbed of their strategic depth, and they simply reacted. And they said, well, if Israel is for it, I'm against it. I'm against Hosni Mubarak. I support those protesters in Tahrir Square. I support those rebels in fighting Gaddafi or Assad. And there were a lot of people that it took me months and months to convince that wasn't so. I had to show all of this evidence of US involvement in these uprisings and show how artificial they were, and how this narrative of Israel supporting this leader or that, how that was a psychological warfare. That is why Israel is the way it is. That's how it's being used. And we can see this playing out elsewhere around the world. I'm based in Southeast Asia. I watch the same sort of ethno-religious divide and conquer games being played right now in neighboring Myanmar. There's no Jews here. And it's not because the Rohingya are Muslims. It's because this is what empire does everywhere it goes. It's their simplest but most effective trick, because it's touching that raw nerve of human emotion. And then the third thing I want to point out is that the idea of Muslims and Jews living together in the Middle East is not a fantasy. It's something that's happening right now. The largest population of Jews living in the Middle East outside of Israel are actually in Iran. They have this large Jewish community. It has gotten smaller over time, and that's mainly because of the tensions between the US and Israel against Iran. And it really isn't because Iran doesn't want them there. They've been there for a very long time. The Iranian government doesn't need to do this, but they actually give them a seat in the Iranian government so that they have a voice of representation in the Iranian government. So Jews and Muslims living together side by side in the Middle East is something that's already happening right now. It's happening in Iran, which is ironic because you would swear, if you followed the Western media, that Iran was the one driving all of this chaos. It's actually Israel and the US and all of its Western partners. They're the ones driving this. It doesn't need to be this way. And if people can see through this cheap trick that they just keep using over and over again, if they can see Israel as a country being brainwashed by a small group of individuals who have hijacked the government, misleading the country, leading them off of a cliff, actually, and dividing the entire region, not even in Israel's own best interests, I think that would be the first step in solving this problem, but also realizing that the problem with Israel is not in Tel Aviv. It's in Washington, it's in London, it's in Brussels. It's these large corporate financier interests on Wall Street or in London that are driving the empire that Israel is a symptom of. And it's not just Israel. Saudi Arabia is the exact same problem. Turkey, to a large extent, is the exact same problem. Here in Asia, we have Taiwan turning into the same sort of divisive, meddling nexus of Western projection into the region. That's what Israel is. It's like a forward operating base. It's not there as a nation invested in its own self-preservation. It is a forward operating base. It's meant to engage aggressively against everyone that it comes in contact with. It's not there to cultivate relations that a normal nation state needs to thrive. So I just thought I'd point out these things. There's a lot more. If the conflict continues, I'm going to continue covering this. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It helps the channel grow, and it's free to do. Look in the video description for the links to this discussion between Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore. It is really good, and you're going to learn a lot, so please check that out. There's also ways you can help support my work so that I continue making videos like this. And as always, thank you for watching.